My name is Chris McLaughlin. I'm the lead 3D environment artist at Floyd County Productions. We're most known for Archer. And it may seem weird that an environment artist is going to be telling you about character stuff, rapid iteration for characters and animation. But last season was a particularly interesting season for us because we did a ton of stuff with aliens, sci-fi, giant creatures, things that we don't typically do. And I do a lot of character stuff outside of work and freelance and things like that. So it was a great opportunity to try out some workflows and figure out how to make what we needed to make in the absolute shortest time possible. So what I'll be sharing with you guys today are some of the workflows I found, some of the tips I found to speed up the process and allow you to take your characters, your creatures, things like that, and get them into your scene, into your game, into your project as early as possible so that you can make informed decisions about whether or not things are working or if you need to change something. So you get concept art, you get it into the game, and you go, the concept art is great, but the final product doesn't really fit our design. So the process is really just about kind of playing your own art director, which is great if you're working on indie projects or you're working for a smaller studio that doesn't have access to a concept department. Because the most important thing about art direction is the ability to determine cohesion for your designs and if everything fits. So I'll be sharing some personal work and some stuff from Floyd from last season. I brought a ton of stuff. Hopefully I can get through it, and I'd love to be able to open up for questions or demo some stuff for you guys if you have any questions. So we will get started. So the first project I wanted to share with you guys today was this like concept piece I've been working on earlier. This was made over the course of just a couple of nights after work, which, you know, if you've got a busy schedule, you got a home life, you got other people, you understand that finding time to work on stuff outside of school or work is very hard. So it's about making the most out of the little bit of time you can scrape together. So what I want to share with you guys was some of the things that you can do in Zbrush and then really polish and push in Photoshop to help you get an idea of what's working, what's not, and cool directions to take your piece so you're not spending 5 hours detailing skin and then saying, well, now I want them to have, you know, 4 eyes, and you got to redo the whole thing. So the final product we got on this guy was more like this. And this is all just Polypaint. It's all simpler stuff. He's been decimated to be able to run in here, so I no longer have any kind of subdivision levels on anything. But the key thing to remember when working on stuff like this is work as non-final as possible. So don't worry about subdivision levels. Really just kind of go Dynamesh, mask stuff on top of your model, extract it out, refine it. Work in whichever way allows you to achieve results the fastest. So what I mean by that is little details that you can do on things like his little headpiece here. This was done just by taking his mesh here and literally just masking on top of it and making some kind of cool patterns. And then extracting that out, and then just colorizing it and then moving it around and trying to come up with cool, interesting shapes. The original concept for this guy was done by an artist named, and I'm totally going to butcher this, Alexander Shatterheen. So I took what he had done, which was more of a Warcrafty style, and tried to make it realistic. Once you start building up your forms and getting something that looks interesting, you can shoot your stuff over into Photoshop and start building on top of it to try and push your forms, or you can just minimize Photoshop. There we go. So you can push a lot of the detail work inside Photoshop to help you achieve your final look and how you want certain attributes to work. So the biggest example between what I just showed you and what we're looking at here is we have a lot more kind of subsurface reddening of the skin, things to make them feel a little more alive, and more shadows and things like that to make them feel a little more intense. So how does this whole pipeline work together? Inside ZBrush, when you're working on something and you have a piece that you feel like is at a spot where you'd like to take it to Photoshop and see what you can do with it, inside of your Z plugins, you can run ZBrush to Photoshop. And I've had this work successfully with like CS5, CS6. It's designed for CC, but it still worked with it about half the time, so your results may vary if you're using an older version of Photoshop. You can turn on multiple different layers that you want this to render, and then shoot over into ZBrush, Photoshop, and it'll automatically construct your entire layer system for you here. It'll go ahead and generate your masks. It'll go ahead and generate any effects, like if you told it to use a depth or an SSS. It'll go ahead and create those and automatically add color balancing and things like that. So there's really no setup work here to get that stuff in here and then start messing around with it. So in ZBrush, I had already decided on how I wanted to tune the differences of value in his skin. And when I say differences in value, I'm talking about where we have light values versus darker values. So where we have like kind of modeling on the skin and things like that, just the general contrast between the base skin and those kind of darker spots. But when you're in Photoshop, these colors don't really matter. And you can kind of start playing with things and switching stuff around and feeling out what's going to give you a better read and what's going to sell your character or your creature's attitude. So here, where we originally had this kind of more human skin, I might say, well, I'm working on a horror project, and I want something where he feels more dangerous, he's not as easy to see. Maybe I'll go with like, almost like a grayscale skin and like bright red features so that you're walking around with a flashlight or whatever, you just kind of get the glimpse of the eyes or whatever, and you're trying to scare your player, you're giving them something they can't focus on, and you're using aggressive red colors to signify danger. All right, that works. But if it's dark, I can't see him at all. Maybe I'm behind him. I'm not going to see anything. So that may not be a good direction for the particular part in your level or the scene that you're going to use this creature in. So you may then need to go and say, all right, I got to adjust my lighting. I got to adjust, whatever I need to adjust to make them stand out. Or you'll say, like, Ninja Turtles is cool. I want them to look like Ninja Turtles. So maybe your art director is your kid. I want Ninja Turtles. You're like, okay. So here's a Ninja Turtle kind of version. Feels maybe a little more like Violent Warcrafty, where we have kind of the traditional greenish orc. And so you might say, all right, this feels a little more appropriate for what we're going for. We want a simpler color palette. He stands out, blah, blah, blah. But however he fits into your game world or your project world. Maybe you want like bright pink. You can really kind of tune around all your values and stuff in here. Maybe you want to give him like a beard because you want him to be like cool and old and wise, and he's like a shaman. Maybe he's like an old shaman turtle. There's lots of freedom you have in here to really kind of just crank stuff out. It can be goofy, it can be whatever, but you might be surprised at what you create. You go, all right, there's actually something cool here, and I want to take it back into ZBrush and lock that in. One of the most powerful features of doing this in Photoshop is the Liquify filter, which is just under Filter and Liquify, because you can come in and do huge proportional changes with just the simple Liquify brush. So maybe we look here and we say, okay, this is cool, but I want him to feel, what if he was like large and kind of brutish? Then we come in on Liquify, we really enhance the brow, we kind of push the ears out a little weird, we make the most gigantic traps possible, give him kind of that weird chin. You can push a lot of the stuff around. I even pushed around some of the little bits coming off his necklace because I'm like, yeah, maybe I want to dent those up. I want to see what they look like. So you have a lot of freedom with connecting these two together and saving yourself the time of saying, well, I'm going to experiment and try it in Zbrush. You can, and it'll be pretty quick, but sometimes doing something like this is a lot faster. If I did want to come in here and try some of these kind of things on this guy, I have a lot of subtools, so it may not allow me the most freedom to really experiment. There are ways that you can run through like a Transpose Master, and you can kind of merge everything together briefly on a T-pose mesh. I'm going to delete the extra subtool I have because I do not want this computer to die when I do this. So you can run like a T-pose mesh, and it'll take your base configuration for your model right here, and it'll say, okay, this is T-pose. Oh, sorry, this is going to be for like rigging. But you can come through and you can then start doing like larger proportion changes, and then you can push it back out, and it'll repopulate all your subtools based on how you move things around or push your proportions. And it's typically pretty quick. It is doing a copy of it, so you can hop back in, whatever, and kind of mess with things again, so you don't have to worry about losing your work. That's another thing. If there's anyone who's not really familiar with Zbrush, you're going to get copies of your subtools and things like that up here, so your subtool's never really destroyed. You just need to look in this very obvious panel. Just kidding. It's so hidden. But one other thing that's important to remember when you're trying to establish the look and feel of a character and not do a full thing, you're just trying to flesh out what feels right. The face is what matters. The eyes are especially important, and you can get a lot of character into your eyes by doing just simple material swaps based on what the rest of your model has on it. So for this guy, I just have a simple like toy plastic shader. I could run any other kind of shader on this. And you'll see right now the eyes aren't changing, and that's because I've filled their material with that toy shader. So here I'm going to make sure I only have material on, because it will take the RGB value of your material as well. You can come to color and fill object. And so now your eyes are going to be this kind of red, and when you switch back to your normal material, these eyes will maintain that material you filled them with. If you don't like that it switches around, you can come in on your other subtools here and say you just want a basic startup material. You can do the same thing and just fill that, and whenever you go to change your material for your other things, it's not going to affect it. There's some other fun shaders you can do, and this is where it can get a little dangerous. Is say I wanted to use like a skin shade for my skin here. You get something that feels more realistic. We're getting a lot more ambient lighting. Things are kind of popping out more. We don't have those dark shadows that are hiding our own texture information from us. But the important thing to remember is that this is also now far brighter and more evenly lit, and that may not be what it looks like in the end result on your project. So just be careful with balancing the overall values of what you're coloring or what you're painting with to make sure you're getting a realistic depiction of what your end result's going to look like. As far as actually just polypainting itself, there's a couple really simple things you can do to help give you a lot of variation in what you're doing very quickly. Since I've decimated them, this is going to be some kind of Ugo polypaint. So you just have to use your imagination a little bit on how some of this turns out. But when you select just RGB, this is going to take whatever color you have here in the color palette, it's going to apply it to your model. So here I just have white and black, it's just using white. If I do alt, it's going to use my alternate color, which is black. And just like anything else with Zbrush, I can affect this with an alpha. So let's go with like a cool Christmas tone. And I'm going to go with color spray. And just kind of start putting this around. And you can tell it's kind of giving me a lot of uneven distribution in large chunky areas, and that may not be what I want. I may want something a little bit tighter. And this is exactly what I did for the kind of like modeling on the skin, where in the tighter areas we have that kind of darker, spotty-ish kind of effect. This is basically all that is you just use your regular Polypaint. With a stroke, you can even use an alpha if you want to get crazy. And that'll give you a little bit more kind of cool organic breakup. Now the differences between these two, you might notice this color spray and then this regular spray. Your regular spray is going to give you fairly even distribution because all of the points on the alpha are bright white. Color spray is going to give you differentiations and basically the opacity of the stroke that it's generating. So you have stuff that's white, stuff that's gray, and stuff that's kind of a mid-tone in between. That's going to affect how strong what it's putting down is. You can kind of tell you've got some very light versions right next to some very heavily saturated versions. So experiment with that. The best tip I could give you for getting Polypaint to feel effective is to look up airbrushing techniques. Polypaint, once you kind of get a better understanding or more comfortable with airbrush, it's super similar. Because some of these color spray things, you could use those as tips on like a airbrush, and it would give you the exact same effect, or at least something similar. So how you could best utilize that is to go, just like with everything else, you want to go general to specific. And so you want to start with some large brushes with a low intensity, and you want to just kind of start blocking in your values and just gradually building things up. Get your large tone shifts kind of locked in, and then start getting in on more of that specific detail, especially around your face. So when I also talked about why the face and the texture information and fidelity in the face is very important, is because if you haven't noticed already, the hair is basically Play-Doh. But ideally, when we're looking at them in this render, that's not the first thing that comes to your mind. That's not the first thing you notice. Ideally, you're focusing on this and kind of the reaction you get from the presentation and how it looks. And if all of the things that we're looking at in this image are cohesive and they all work together. One of the best ways to do that too is if you're working on, say, even something as simple as like a character bust. When you are, I'm getting used to the Mac shortcuts. When you are working on something like this and you're doing your Dynamesh block-ins, one of the easiest things to do make Zbrush stop listening to you, is keep the head separate from the rest of the body. Ideally, from the camera angle you're shooting from, you won't really notice it, or you can cover it up in Photoshop. But if you keep the head separate from the rest of the body, then what that allows you to do is really build up the face and the head more than you're building up the rest of the body. So that allows you to really focus that detailed information there and not worry about creating something that is so dense that your machine has a hard time rendering it. So here, now that I have these two things split, if I wanted to re-Dynamesh this head and start working on it, if I smooth out where it intersects with the neck, we're going to get some goofiness. And you can always fill that back in. But I now have ZBrush's way it utilizes vertex information. It's really only caring about the head because I have the head selected. So that's another good tip to kind of help make the most out of what you're working on in ZBrush, especially if you don't have a particularly powerful machine, is split stuff up and really focus fire on the important areas that are going to sell your design, whether that's to an art director or to yourself or maybe the other people on your project. So just kind of working economically. So the other stuff that I want to talk about now is going to deal with a lot of the stuff we did for Archer for season 10. And so how do we take some of these ideas and how do we use them in production? And how do we do it when we maybe only have, say, 3 days to make something like this? And we're not entirely sure what it's supposed to look like. So how do we get to that point? How do we get to, yes, with art direction, with even yourself and your own critique, how do you build something out super quickly and get it out there? So for this guy, this was a giant space nautilus, and we had never done anything like this on Archer before. So these were some kind of rough concepts as to what this guy needed to look like, and blend shape information. So how do we figure this out when we're looking at 2D imagery and we're saying, all right, that's cool, I want to do that, and then you get into production, you're trying to make it, and then you realize this can't work this way. That's one of the key things about this pipeline, is figuring out what part of the design is not going to happen because of the way it currently lives, and how do we need to change it so that it can work. So unfortunately, I wasn't able to bring this dude's Z tool because he's just too intense, but so starting with just basic grayscale renders in Zbrush, you can go ahead and start generating out your key poses. And so if you're working on animation, you're working on games, you're working on anything that a individual is going to look at, you need to think about the key pose. So what is this thing going to do that's going to sell the shot or what's happening to convey the action? So it's figuring out, all right, what are my key poses? What's the most ridiculous thing it needs to do? And then how am I going to figure out how it's going to do that? So this guy started off with shells. So we made a ton of shell variants because that was one of the largest parts of his body. And for this, all I did to make it as fast and as quick as possible is I created this general shape in 3ds Max, and then I used a lot of bin modifiers and instances to create this kind of curved shape. So one of the benefits to using instances is if you need to adjust any part of your design in like 3ds Max or Maya or even Blender, I haven't used it that much, but I know it has a lot of cool stuff about it. If you affect a single portion of this chunk here, it's going to propagate throughout the rest of the design. So that means that if you want to start adding in like any kind of modifiers, like smooth modifiers, you want to take this thing's all over the place. So if you go through and you do some, edit polys, you start doing some poly modeling and things on one section, it's going to propagate through the rest, and you get a quick idea of whether or not this is going to work. Here you can even take it further, and something like this with non-instance geometry would probably take a while. If all of your sections are instanced, this is going to take 5 minutes. So work in ways that make sense to quickly block out everything you're trying to see at one time. See it all together, see it all in context as early as possible. Same thing here, if you just go in and add like an edit poly on here and extrude something out, it's going to extrude all through the rest of it. So we did lots of shell variations to figure out what that design was going to look like. And then once we had something that we felt pretty comfortable with that we liked, it's what we ended up going with, is kind of a mixture of 2 or 3 of them. But because we had built this in 3ds Max and we had built it, with UVs and instances, then once you texture one, it textures all of it, which is another thing to keep in mind. Layering your UVs on top of each other for stuff like this, you can quickly establish, yeah, these colors work, these don't. And then you can use procedural stuff like triplanar textures or other things to help give you variation in world space. You can do the same thing, with like macro normal, stuff like that. So we went through and found our key poses here, and these are basically just giant tubes that I made in Max and then shot them over. I made 3 different variations, medium, a short, and a long. And then those were what we had in Max and then what I took into Zbrush. And you can quickly pose this stuff in Zbrush using masking, or if you have, like 8 jillion tentacles, you can create just a very simple rig and get some versions of them kind of rigged up and placed, and then take that geometry, collapse down the rig, take it into Zbrush and start maneuvering them around. In Zbrush, I made just a handful of different squiggly tentacles as groups and just duplicated them around a bunch. So that's a fast way to kind of sell if you have a very busy design. What's this going to look like when all this stuff is overlapping each other? Does it still read? Does anything about it need to change? But getting this stuff kind of blocked in and then establishing your key poses, you can use things like Morph Targets to help you switch quickly between something that's more of a neutral pose and something that's more of like an action pose. And that'll kind of help you figure out, like, yeah, stuff works, it doesn't. And you can see how you can just shove the tubes into a space. You don't need to be precious with stuff when you're figuring it out. Once you've figured it out, then yeah, be precious about it, really refine it. But in the beginning, don't try to make a Michelangelo sculpture if you don't know what your sculpture is going to look like. Another thing you can do with Zbrush that's extremely helpful in situations like this, where you have this guy needed to have like that big open mouth and the big closed mouth and things like that, is use the Morph Targets to your advantage. You can take Morph Targets and you can generate your blend shapes, or in Max are also called Morph Targets. And you can generate these 2 key shapes just within Zbrush, and then pull that into Max, hook it up into your rig, and then toggle between the two and see if your deformations are working properly, if you're getting weird stretching, if stuff's intersecting. You can establish all of that early. One of the other guys we had is once they go inside this giant space nautilus, they get attacked by these tiny little parasites. These were the original concepts for our little parasites. They're super cute, and they look like little dogs. We've all seen the same dogs, right? All right. So this was the first kind of basic proxy model that we generated for it. And this utilizes something I want to show you guys that's kind of the core of figuring stuff out quickly and getting it in and seeing if it works. So we built these 2 guys and kind of had them posed out. I made 2 different versions of the head, so one closed, one open, because I know those are shapes we're going to need to hit here. And then posed them based on that kind of action pose. And he kind of looked goofy. So we ended up going with a different design. But we wouldn't have known that it looked a little goofy until we saw it in context. We saw it all together. The way our pipeline works is we're 3D, but predominantly supporting 2D. So we're able to take these very basic rigs that we generate here and pass them on to our 2D animators, and they can pull those models into their software, and they can see the key poses we're making. They can see them from any angle, and then they can use those as reference to draw from. So getting something like this knocked out is about half a day or so, and it's in the hands of the people who need it. And then they can quickly say, yeah, this works. No, this doesn't work. This shouldn't bend like this. We should move the arms. So we end up going with something like this, where he's just super jacked, little dog. Those back legs, he always skips leg day, though. So what's cool about this is being able to generate these kind of proxy models like this with very basic rigging, is that you can animate them, and then you can bake out that FBX animation, and then you can put it into whatever your project is. And then you can have these things basically running at your player. If it's a game, you can have them running at your player, and you can go, all right, cool, that's menacing. Or, no, those look like weird chicken wings. This isn't what I wanted. So, get them in there, you test stuff out, and you can know right away whether something's working. So what does that look like? It looks like this. And so these are 2 little parasites here. So each one of these is currently split up into its own subtool. But if I merge it down, you'll kind of see how this whole system works. I have no idea how this hacking work on Mac OS. All right. So when we look at them in this context, we see these different colored groups are effectively what were different rigging points. So you can take your model that's super basic. It's just your dominant volumes. We're not even going into secondary detail. We're really just looking at primary volumes and how this silhouette's going to work. It'll help us to get an idea on posing and what our joint sections are going to look like. So one of the ways you can utilize this when you go inside 3ds Max or Maya or whatever your rigging tool of choice is when you export this out as an FBX, you can tell it to do all of these sections separately. And once you have them in there, you can take your individual sections here and you can set their pivot where it needs to live in order for this to rotate properly. And then create a simple hierarchy rig where, your midsection, your chest, your neck, they all listen to this cog, the primary rotation point. Your shoulders, the elbows listen to that, forearms listen to that, secondary forearms if you got them. Hands, things like that. Simple hierarchy rig, setting your pivots, and quickly generating out your poses. We got the same kind of setup here. With this guy. So we have our basic sections here, because these are going to be the dominant points of rotation and what we need to affect in order to see how it works. He's got two little overlapping sections here because you can also create, depending on how in-depth you want to get into it, you can create simple toggles to toggle on like a closed mouth or an open mouth and things like that. So when they get into the hands of your animators or whoever's going to be using it down the pipeline, they can quickly toggle stuff on and off and see how it works. One of the other ones we had that followed a similar thing that was really fun was this space T-Rex. So these are the base concepts that I got. And that we needed to basically generate this T-Rex, and we needed to hit these kind of bendy poses and things like that in order for him to be able to do the animations that we needed him to do. This, again, was another one that was about 3 days, maybe, is all we really had to get something together and get it out. So this is what we ended up with. We went through a ton of revisions in figuring out how this guy works, if it works for what we're trying to do. One of the things that you'll probably notice that's very different is we've now got the little chicken arms. And here we had gigantic, like, deltoids the size of his head. He was also jacked like our parasites. Some of the animations that he was doing was flipping things over with his head, stuff like that. And so you kind of quickly figured, well, if he's got those giant arms, why can't he just pick stuff up? So he's got now tiny bird arms, which is something that's crazy. Is birds, like their whole scapula and arms aren't actually connected to their rib cage area. They're like free floating, which is kind of crazy. That's another key thing. Always study anatomy, because you'll never stop being surprised at what's relevant. So this is what we ended up switching out, is doing kind of like smaller shoulder intersection points. But we wouldn't have known that we needed to do that if we hadn't been able to generate out a bunch of models as quickly as possible and get them into the hands of the people that needed them. So these are some simple pose tests that we did, or I did based on that initial concept we saw. So this is stuff we know that he has to do. So how does the model need to work in order to support him doing those things? Well, he needs to work like this. And we also are going to get some really weird stuff going on with these back spikes, depending on how they're built. So for this one, we did end up going with a full 3D, fully rigged, fully animated T-Rex that we then posed. He had blended weights, all the traditional 3D model stuff. And we had the animation test that we were able to then pass those FBXs on over to our 2D crew that could then use them as like roto reference or however they needed to utilize them. So what does this final guy look like? Similar thing. So just all the little chunky bits, everything split up in a way that makes him easy to use, easy to start switching stuff around, animating, seeing if it works. And then he's got tongue and stuff like that, and they're separate. What's really beneficial to a pipeline like this as well is if you have someone who's primarily rigging and someone who's primarily animating, so you're not doing everything yourself, or even if you are, if you get something that's built up to this point, send this over to your animators or to whoever's rigging. This is pretty common in 3D animation, as well as you create kind of this maquette proxy of what your final is going to look like. The rigging team or whoever's rigging can go ahead and start rigging this, and they can figure out, all right, where do I need to put joints? Where, how do relationships need to work? What's going to get screwy if I bend them this way? So you can have design, rigging, all this stuff working in tandem, which will super speed up your workflow, especially if you're on smaller teams. You don't have a lot of time. So here I've got our pose file as well. Yeah, there are two little guys here. And these groups were just the basic masking groups I created when working on the Dynamesh model. So this is not the chopped up one, this is the Dynamesh. But like I said before, these back spikes went crazy when I was trying to bend them around because of the way the weight blending was. So we had to figure out ways for this guy to be able to bend and hit some of those crazy spine kind of movements without all of these chunks intersecting with each other. And again, that's something that we didn't know we would maybe need to look out for. We weren't sure how many spikes he had based on our original concept here. We knew he had some, but we didn't know he was going to have nearly as many as he did in the end. So just figuring out how those relationships needed to work, how that stuff needed to be set up. One thing that's super helpful for things like this is creating insert mesh brushes. So for these spikes, I made probably 3 variations of these spikes, and then I went ahead and UV'd those, and then I used those on an insert mesh, and basically just drug them down the back of the body and rotated them around to create lots of different sizes, shapes, rotations, so that they felt random and it doesn't feel like we're looking at the same 3 spikes over and over and over, even though we are. One of the other big benefits to UVing your mesh brushes, your insert mesh brushes first, is as long as you're not dynameshing them, you're leaving them separated from the body, then every time you create a new insert mesh of it, every time you drag it onto the body, it's going to have those UVs. So it's, again, stacking those UVs, working in ways that make it really easy down the pipe, similar to the way the space would work. You stack those UVs, so then if you want to test color, you're not doing it to every single one. It's just one and done, and you're good to go. right, so one of the other ones we had was our ancient aliens. So we had a scene where, oh, actually, no, there was one other thing I wanted to mention about the Rex. So when you have the chopped up rig like this, and you have stuff that's already on some UV layers, you have some stuff that's already kind of established, and you know what you're going to be working on, and you know what your final is supposed to look like, then you can go and do your regular production pass where you retopologize, put loops in the right spots, do all this kind of stuff. Go ahead and have it UV'd, send that over to the UV'd version to texturing, or if you're texturing it, and then the other version over to rigging, and you can be simultaneously rigging and texturing and doing all these things at the same time for your production model. And then if you need to use this maquette further down the road, you can put whatever kind of UVs you want to put on this thing. Since they're all cylinders, it's fairly easy to UV, but set all those up, and then in 3ds Max you can use like render to texture. You can take the final thing and basically bake all those textures down onto your chopped up rig, and you continue to use that maquette now with the textures anywhere in that pipeline that needs that basic version, like say a 2D animation department. He had a lot of particular things about his design, like where scars needed to be, and things like that. So we needed to make sure that that texture information was staying consistent with animation, so that we didn't have scars randomly switching sides of the face, and stuff like that. So we had that parity between anytime he's 3D, anytime he's 2D, all the time. Now these ancient aliens, we had 2 different versions of these aliens that needed to be in this giant war that we come across. And we do a flashback. So we need to see them alive, we need to see them in battle armor, and we also need to see them as dead. And we also need to see it in like 4 days. So, okay, how do you do it really fast? This was one I tried to bring in the tools for it, but this computer did not like that. So what we ended up with in the end was your basic kind of rig. The armor bits that we have on these, they're part stuff that we purchased and part stuff that we already had, or stuff that we purchased and needed to be super modified. So it's also reusing assets, things like that. So one of the ways you can quickly previs whether the stuff is working, stuff is staying consistent, is just using a little bit of rigging knowledge and setting things up so that here we have little controllers I created, so that when you have these in your scene, you click this little thing and it pops up with a little custom attribute that says, are they dead? Do they have a helmet? And you can check those, you can check none of them, you can check different versions, and then you can quickly generate just through one model and one checkbox. Okay, he's dead. All right, it shows the skull. Nope, now he's got a helmet. All right, he's got a helmet. All right, no, he's alive. Okay, he's got this. And you can also set up so they're dead with a helmet. They're, you can create up to a couple permutations pretty quickly in your scene based on whatever the needs are, and you're not loading multiple files. You're rigging one thing, and you have access to all this other stuff because you're just parenting it to the joint that's there. Now his armor worked the same way as the stuff on the Orc. All of his armor was masked, built the basic body with Dynamesh, mask on top of it, and extract it. And that's it. So use what you've already got to generate all the new stuff you need. Don't try to, precisely model on top. Same thing with this one. So we've got our dead, we've got our helmet, and we've got alive. So you can use, and all this was made in Zbrush, so you can quickly crank these things out, hook them into your rig, and then see if it's working. Because you can take any of these meshes, take it back into Zbrush, or use it in Max, Maya, whatever. Do whatever poly modeling you need to do, and then just pop it back into the rig, and you can see it right away. And that's really helpful to be able to see, like, all right, cool, this skull works. I know it works with this helmet. I know this head works with this helmet. The helmet's fine. This is a little closer up one, just to kind of see. And so some of these things too, like this helmet, I just made that with ZModeler, just do a Dynamesh and then clean it up, Z-model. You can push stuff really far, which is simple Z-modeling, or poly modeling, or whatever, however you want to handle it. Yeah, same thing here. Because you can also create, in ZBrush, I'm talking about morph targets. If you have your regular head and it's set up the way that you like, store a morph target, and then create the skull version of it. And then you can kind of toggle between the two and see how stuff is looking. And I got one last thing I want to show you guys, and then I'll open up to any questions. We also had to make this gun. So I've been talking about all these soft forms and tentacles and all this other stuff. So what about guns, armor, hard surface? If you haven't used it yet, you should absolutely use the live Boolean. So this is another one where you can take very basic shapes inside of here, and you can start stacking up different subtraction modifiers or addition modifiers onto it to create the shapes you need to make. So looking at some of these parts solo, this is really all we're looking at. This is super basic. This is, again, stuff you can just do with Z-Modeler. You can also just create these forms. You could use stuff like Boolean, whatever you want to use in like Max or Mies Boolean software. The whole idea of Booleans is pretty agnostic, so you can use it anywhere. But the live Boolean is really nice because you see all these updates in real time. So if I start moving stuff around, I can kind of see how it's going to affect what's underneath it. So say I like clamp this in a whole lot more. You could have, a much thinner area at the top. We can make it a lot thicker. You see all this stuff in real time. You see it in context, again, which is the driving force of cohesion. Your art direction is seeing everything in context, seeing it all together. So I know I went kind of fast because I did want to go through a lot of that stuff and just kind of talk about ways that you can utilize rapidly iterating things, getting them into context, seeing what they look like, and kind of taking them a step further and doing some of the rigging stuff. So because we started late, I say we have 10 more minutes, but they might kick me out. We'll see what happens. They looked at me like I was crazy when I said that. So I'll go ahead and open it to any questions. Yeah.
Okay, this is on the topic of iteration. I want to ask, when it comes to things like fur and hair, for example, like, when you want to iterate and get it done fast, would you sculpt it or just dive into the hair card first?
Definitely sculpt it out, because the main thing about the hair is going to be, depending on what you're making, if you're going for something that's more Pixar style, that hair is going to have a very distinct silhouette. And that's what's going to really help set that character apart from anyone else, is going to be what that hair silhouette looks like. So you want to lock that in with like a Dynamesh first. If you're doing more kind of like realistic style hair, then a good way to approach that is to create that Dynamesh block in and then make some tubes. Like you could append in some cylinders. This. You put in some cylinders. You kind of like push this stuff around so it gets some cool form and shape to it. And so, you can make a couple different versions of these. And so let's pretend this is, cool looking hair strands. You can take this over to your model. And kind of lay this down a little bit. And just use, move, things like that to try to get something that looks a little more like traditional hair. And just layer it on top of your Dynamesh, especially in highly visible areas. And it's going to kind of help sell that hair idea. Just putting that on top. Another thing you can do with hair, if you want to rapidly see what that hair looks like, is you can use fiber mesh, but set the fiber mesh settings. I can't remember off the top of my head what they are. But you can set fiber mesh so that it's effectively displaying a single card. And you can generate them with UVs, load in a texture of like some hair, and it'll just propagate that around. And you can kind of get an idea of if that hair, the hairstyle cards is working. If you want something cartoonier, different colors, different styles, you can quickly just kind of get that visualized. Any other questions? Yeah. So it's a lot of the similar thing in that we will get some concept in, and it's usually, say it's maybe one angle from like a back corner or something. And then we work, because it's production TV, we work on a very tight deadline. So it's really figuring out, all right, how fast do I need to make this? What's going to change? Because we're always changing stuff. Because that's one of the huge benefits to the way we work with 3D environments is you can look at some storyboards, and storyboards will put cameras everywhere to visualize the scene. And because we're 3D, we can put cameras anywhere. So that portion of it's very quick, and so we have to be just as fast to be able to build out an environment that supports like any camera angle that somebody's going to come up with. So a lot of it is looking and saying, okay, because we've been 10 seasons now, we have a big library of stuff that we've used in the past, but it doesn't always fit. So a lot of times it's saying, okay, I've got this thing that's 40% of what I want. Do I want to fully model out this new thing, or take this one thing, change out what I need to change out, get it into the scene, make sure it works. But the most important thing, if you want to go with like the iteration idea on that, is it's always that general to specific. You build everything out with as basic models as you possibly can first to just get that proportion locked in, and then just keep refining things in. And then if you have a particularly large environment, once you can actually see what those final storyboards look like, just really focus fire on details on those specific shots. So it's kind of juggling that time and figuring out where it's going to go. Yeah.
What that you implement something that would take some time and something that you have to bring it out and have more than
The actual answer to why, I don't know, because I think they decided that way before I ever got there. But the big benefit is kind of similar to what I was saying to him, is when you have a traditional 2D cartoon, anytime you have a background, or you have a storyboard, you have a shot, and you have your background drawn, anytime you change the camera, now you have to redraw all that stuff from the same angle. So it makes, I feel like with traditional 2D cartoons, at least on like a seasonal production where they go really quickly, it kind of makes people hesitant to shoot outside of their normal shots. Like if you think of The Simpsons kitchen, we rarely see that from many different angles than that one kind of like sitcom style dominant camera where we're looking straight at them and we can't see the doors, we can't see what the rest of the environment looks like. But when it's in full 3D, you can put that camera anywhere, and then when you render that out, you know exactly your proportions, you know exactly your perspective, all of that. You can also then play with focal lengths in a way that's far more controlled. So if you're like, all right, for this shot, I want this cool like fisheye wide angle, you can shoot it wide angle. You don't have to guess on your perspective or anything because it's 3D. It's right there. So you can like experiment way more and way faster. So I got there because I say yes to everything, which is another good rule of thumb. Is I was working at another studio, if you don't remember, and I got the opportunity to do a freelance, and I just said yes because I was just out of school and I wanted to do as much stuff as possible because I like doing everything. I ended up working with a guy who worked at Floyd, and so we worked together. And he was like, "Hey, you're a fun guy to work with. I like working with you. If we get any openings, I'll let you know," stuff like that. And then it just kind of evolved from there. So about, 70% of the projects you say yes to will never happen because people hate working without getting paid, which is totally understandable. But for those 30% that do go through, you might be surprised at who you get connected to and what opportunities come out of that. And it can be hard, especially if you're not particularly social. You don't really like working with other people, which is going to be really tough. Just say yes to tons of opportunities. Because you also don't know what you don't know until someone asks you to do it, and you go, "I've never thought about that. Let me figure that out." And so it only makes you stronger to work on other projects. And just say yes to stuff that sounds cool. Now we're looking. You got time for like one or two more questions? Okay. Yeah. Oh, okay, we got time for all the questions. Oh no, yeah, I'll be probably heading out here in a couple minutes. We got time. They said 2 more, so I guess they got to set up for the next one. But, yeah. Mostly when we're at the stage of asking like, what is it? What does it need to be? Then it doesn't matter. Because if you're still asking questions about what it is, then you don't need any constraints. You can put some constraints, obviously. I don't think you can sculpt a ghost because they're invisible. But you can, yeah, says, I've never seen one. That's where like Dynamesh, stuff like that, getting the texel density that but the vertex density you need in the places you need it to answer the question of, yes, this is moving in the right direction, or no, this is not. Then obviously once you lock it in, you go, okay, I know what it is, I know what it needs to do, and I'm now going to build a mesh that can do and support those things that it needs to do. So it's kind of don't care in the beginning, and then towards the end you should have a very solid idea of like, okay, I need a lot of topology for deformation in these areas, so I need to balance that with, the rest of the poly count. Because yeah, with the animation, there's limits, but for the most part, you have way more freedom in games. So, you got one more? Yeah.
I guess speaking of games, like when you have to lower poly count, you're inevitably gonna lose stuff, even when you overlay the high res over the low res model. How do you do sacrifice in terms of poly count? Like which parts you delete and what just can't happen?
I would say probably the easiest way to quickly figure that out in the beginning is your camera. So your player controls the camera, and if it's a first-person game, your player is the camera. So it's figuring out, all right, what's always closest to the camera, and then what's kind of far away and doesn't really matter. So you can kind of use that to judge, like, all right, if I'm making a first-person shooter, I can't really sacrifice too much detail on the gun, or at least the portion of the gun I can see, like if this water bottle is one. I know my detail really needs to be here, but unless it's like a multiplayer game or whatever, there's a good chance the player's never going to see the other side of the gun. Obviously, if it's an object like that, you could probably just symmetrize it and get the same detail, but it's kind of figuring out, I don't think you wouldn't need a super detailed bullet exit area. and you wouldn't want to focus all your detail on that and not really detail the sides. And same if you have like walls and things like that, use like levels of detail passes to call in those far more detailed versions when you need them because they're close to the camera. But they can, for the most part, live at a lower res when they're further away from the camera. So it's really just kind of figuring out, all right, what's my camera doing? And that'll kind of help drive a lot of the other stuff that you need to balance or figure out. Cool. Sweet. Well, thanks for coming. I had a lot of fun. Yeah.